Alrighty, folks. One more, and then I know we're standing between everybody in the bar. So, where's my? Oh man, I forgot my questions. Oh well, I'm gonna have to wing it. I left my questions back there, so we're gonna have to wing it. This is a very special one for me because many moons ago, this gentleman to my left and I were roommates, and we're really good friends, best friends. And so the opportunity to interview him on stage is kind of it's one of those like, this isn't a good analogy, but like proud moments. Like, so, but I'd give you oh, is that on?
I appreciate you, Mo.
So I will give you his bio, but the questions are pretty much his bio. One of the reasons why we asked him to come and speak is because he started his career here in DC. And he's got like the journey of both being a founder and now he runs all acquisitions at Microsoft. So we'll get into that. But why don't we just start off with, man, it's been a minute since you lived in DC. What brought you to DC?
So it's good to be back. As Maurice said, I used to live in DC a long time ago. I'm surprised he didn't tell some other stories, but it's probably a good thing that he didn't. So I live on the West Coast now. I've been working for Microsoft for a little while. I spent a lot of my career in cybersecurity, which, you know, when I got started, we didn't even call it cybersecurity. I think it was probably called IT security or InfoSec. And you know, I spent many, many years doing that, more than I care to remember sometimes. And I'm involved with a number of different government activities, advisory boards. And so I haven't been back to DC for 4 years, the longest time as an adult that I haven't been in DC. This is the first place I lived when I graduated from college. So it's great to be back. It's very different than it was last time I was here, but great to get a chance to talk to everybody, and thanks for having me.
So let's go back to the start of your cyber career, but also your start of your venture career. Tell everybody about Cyveillance.
Yeah, so back in 1997, so this was way back for some of you, myself and there were 4 of us. 3 of us were brothers, and we did have a white partner, and we started a company called Cyveillance. And we were probably in those days the archetype of a startup. We had this idea. We were gonna. I remember at the time, for those of you who are old enough to remember, you couldn't actually get good connectivity to the internet, right? Like you dialed up over a modem, right? And I know that sounds crazy. If you're under 40, that sounds crazy. But if you're over 40, you're like, well, yeah, I remember those days. And so we had this idea that we were going to cache content, and we were going to serve it up a lot faster by doing that. And so we went around and we started talking to different potential investors and things like that. And the money raising process in those days was a little different than it is now, and there were a lot fewer options than there are today. But we kind of started out with this. We were going to be a content service, and then we ended up. I remember we talked to this brother named Bob Townsend. He ran a bunch of cable businesses, and he and another guy were starting this thing called Space Station Television. So he took us around all these media companies, and what we ended up doing, because a lot of people kept saying, is like, well, you could do that, but this problem we have is that like all of our content is just out there on the internet. Nobody's policing it. Like nobody knows what to do about it. Could you guys help us with that? And so, like good entrepreneurs who were like borrowed money on our credit cards and were sleeping on floors, and like we were like, all right, we'll go figure out how to do that, because that was going to be a way for us to actually get some customers, generate some revenue. Those principles still mattered like many, many years ago, just like they do today. And so we pivoted, and we started out with this company called Online Monitoring Services, and that's what we did. We literally would go out and look for a customer's content. It could be like Time Warner. I remember they were one of our first customers. Another one, I think we did some work for Toyota. Like literally, like people could just take a Toyota logo and throw it up on a website and say, hey, I'm a certified Toyota repair shop. And like there was nothing, like that seems insane today, but like there was nothing to stop you from doing it in those days. The only thing you could kind of rely on was that there were some restrictions around cyber squatting on somebody's domain name. But even there, because I remember testifying in front of Congress on this topic at one point back in like 1998. Like that is like the kind of world we were living in. So that's kind of how we got started. And I will tell you that like when we started the company, me and these 3 other guys, like, we literally, like, we didn't have any money. So like we borrowed a bunch of money, and then we just kind of got started. And I had applied to business school, and I was literally going to go to Stanford. I got in, and they were like, hey, we should start this company. So we started it. And then like things were kind of looked like we might be able to make something happen. So I called Stanford and I said, hey, I'm not going to come. I need to defer this. And they were like, we're not going to let you defer. And I stayed up a couple nights, and I remember Maurice and I talked about this a lot, and I called him one day and I was like, I'm not coming. I'm going to give this thing a run. A year later, I sent all my applications back in. Didn't look like this thing was going to happen. But then we raised some money, and then like I withdrew all my applications, and we were kind of off to the races. But it was, in those days, like our first money came from a company called Lazard Technology Partners. I don't even know if they exist anymore as a VC. I doubt it. It was basically like a VC arm from Lazard Frere, the bank, and their practice was down here. Ultimately, NEA put some money in as part of that, but the folks from Lazard led. There were a couple other independent investors that led, and it was an interesting thing though, because they had a very different model than at the time how West Coast VCs approached this thing. But we were able to raise money. It took a while. We had to hustle pretty hard to get customers and prove we could generate revenue, but we did it. And look, it didn't hurt that it was like 1998 when we raised money, right? Like the backdrop to all of that was like everything internet was going up and to the right. And I always like to say we rode it up, and then in 2000 we rode it back down with everybody else.
Nice. But you guys didn't raise some money. You raised a lot of money. Look,
ultimately we ended up raising about $30 million by the beginning of 2000. By the year 2000, like we had raised about 30 million for that, which in those days, like again, now 30 million today is like a Series A, for a lot of people. And on the West, I mean, a year ago, people were raising like $100 million Series A's. It was ridiculous, particularly out on the West Coast. I don't know if it's similar here, but no, we had raised a decent amount of money. I think we got through about 3 rounds by the time it all kind of came a little bit back to earth in 2000. But we definitely rode that internet wave up. I do like to feel good about the fact that we actually had a real business, real revenues. But it was a long journey. It was definitely not everything up and to the right. And we might have just been better off doing like an online pet store or something like that, and then we could have been worth a lot more.
That's right. So you had your startup career here in DC. You went off to business school. You eventually went off to business school. And then you came back. Tell them a little bit about what brought you back.
So, I did at one, after the bubble burst, I decided to do something different. We ultimately were able to, like Cyvalence ultimately got sold to, it's been through a few different sales at this point. But I decided I want to go back to business school, because one of the things I remember is like when we first raised, the lead VC used to always say, you guys don't have enough gray hair. Like, you don't know what you're doing. Like, we need to get some people who've been through this before, they've done it before, and ultimately, that's ultimately what we did. We brought in a CEO, and then like, part of me was like, I was like, F that. Like, I'm gonna be the guy I should be able to run my own company. And like, ultimately, my goal was to go build the, whatever track record I needed to build to be able to, to do that and not ever have to have that conversation again. So I did decide to go back to B school. This time I had invested so much in being on the East Coast. I decided, I went to Harvard, so the Stanford people, I remember calling Stanford when I applied for like the 5th time, and she's like, are you serious? Are you gonna come this time? Are you serious about this? And then of course, like, they let me in, and then I didn't come, so like, that was probably not. But hey, if they wouldn't have let me in, they wouldn't have felt bad about it either. So that's how life goes sometimes. But no, I ended up going to B school, And then from there, I actually came back to DC. I went to AOL, and I ran all of our security premium services. I ended up working with a guy that I had worked with in consulting in my very first job. And that was other than the fact that in those days, man, like AOL was in a tough spot. I mean, we were like, big company, it was like $10 billion business still, had merged with Time Warner, but a lot of ups and downs, a lot of layoffs. It wasn't a great environment. So short run, but it was kind of fun to be able to be part of AOL. I was able to see some things that I hadn't seen before, and really, that was my first introduction to how consumers thought about security. And one of my partners in those days, ironically, was McAfee, which one of the last job I had before I went to Microsoft was I was CEO of McAfee. So I kind of came full circle, almost 20 years later.
And the other partner was McAfee and.
Yeah, one of our other partners was a company called RSA Security, which I ended up going to when I decided to leave AOL. So that was part of my journey.
So the RSA stint was an entrepreneurial stint because you started up their consumer division, right?
That's right. So I had one of the things we did at AOL is we said, hey, we want to provide better authentication. Like again, these things back in those days were like foreign concepts to many. Now, like two-factor authentication is everywhere. Like all of us have, hopefully not like a Microsoft authenticator, but most people probably know Google Authenticator, so I'll have to say that. But most of us have an authenticator on our phone. You use SMS. So we had this idea that we were going to use these RSA tokens. Now the problem is in those days, like an RSA token, which was the thing with the 6-digit code that changed all the time, was literally a fob that you carried around. But they hired me to come and really try to consumerize their tech, and we wanted to bring it to the banking sector. And so I ended up working for RSA, which is a Boston-based company, and really building their consumer authentication business, which really became the foundation for a lot of the authentication that many people use today, like when you go on your online bank. Like we powered Bank of America, Citigroup. Like most of the big players used our tech in the background, and whether it was the picture, like I don't know if you guys remember these days where you log in and you had to authenticate yourself, have a picture. If you could get an out of band, which we used to call it, what's now SMS messaging, and so like that was the first foray into a lot of the way that many of us authenticate to our online banking sites today. So it's like when I look back, I'm proud of a lot of the work that we did and how foundational it is for identity protection, fraud prevention, that kind of thing in online banking as we know it.
But then RSA ultimately took you away from DC. Right?
RSA ultimately took me away from DC. I stayed here for a few years. I would commute back and forth to Boston a lot. I don't think it was so good for my first marriage, so that was probably not a healthy way to live your life when you're just kind of gone all the time. But it was ultimately I moved up to Boston, and what was great for me is EMC bought RSA. I mean, this is the journey you'll go on in tech if you're earlier in your career. You start at one company, it gets acquired. Ultimately I ended up in California because of it, because EMC owned most of VMware, and I ended up going out to California to work for VMware, and that's kind of that. I haven't been back since. Really enjoy it out there. It's a different tech scene for sure.
Yeah, and then one day you got a call from Cisco.
That's right. So I'm at VMware. I get a call from Cisco. They're like, "Hey, you know something about security? We want a guy to kind of do some different things with our security business." So I literally, I ended up going over to Cisco to run cyber. Ironically, ended up acquiring SourceFire, which is local, like right up the street here in near Baltimore. And so that was a fun, like Cisco was a fun ride for me. I ended up then, spending several years at Cisco building our cybersecurity business. Another stint I'm proud of in the sense that, I remember when I first got to Cisco, we had a firewall, but like, John Chambers and a lot of our customers, like they were kind of like, hey, we should be doing more in security. Like we're such a big player in the infrastructure layer, and we did the SourceFire acquisition. We built a lot of tech, and really changed the trajectory for Cisco. And it's funny because I literally just ran into the current CEO of Cisco like before I came out here, and it really, like, it's a huge part of their strategy now. And Cisco's got other challenges, just given everything that's happening with the cloud. But that was a really interesting ride. And then I went from there to run ultimately I went to Intel to run McAfee. We spun it out of Intel, and I spent kind of 6 or 7 years doing that. So that was a fun ride as well.
So now y'all got the backdrop. Dude's had a lot of experience. Let's flip it to talking about deals. So at Cisco, you did SourceFire. At McAfee, you acquired a couple of companies too. As investors, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about that would make a buyer ultimately, as a buyer, like things that you look for?
So I've acquired a lot of companies in my life. I've been acquired, and this is super important for you all. Probably the most important thing I say is that companies are bought and not sold. Like, maybe you can sell one a used car salesman sells used cars, but like mostly companies are bought and not sold. So you want to, it's funny. I get a zillion things come in all the time. People are like, such and such company is for sale. I'm like, well, what company's not for sale? But maybe Microsoft, because who's going to buy us, right? Like a country would have to buy us. Market cap's a little too big for someone else to acquire. But you get my point. What small venture-backed company is not for sale? So when somebody sends me an email or calls up and some banker is like, hey, this company is for sale, it's kind of ridiculous, because I'm like, of course they're for sale. From the day they started, they were for sale for some price. That may be high for some, low for others. But the thing that's going to make a difference is not that some banker called me. It's going to be that some engineer inside of, whether it was Cisco or McAfee or Microsoft, said, hey, this thing is the future of a product line, or this is a capability that we really need that we're not going to be able to build fast enough on our own, or this can really augment the portfolio in new and different ways. Like with SourceFire, my calculus on SourceFire was, we had a firewall, but we didn't have street cred from a security perspective. We had kind of abandoned our IPS. We had an IPS at Cisco. So for those of you who don't know security products, I'm sorry, I'm probably talking in tongues to you, but we didn't have this one product that was their core product. And by buying SourceFire, we got like the open source security language. So if you're a security person, Snort was the thing. Like, it's something you train on earlier in your career. It's an incredibly important, not as much today, but it used to be a really important foundation to security professionals. We got that capability along with a new product. We actually integrated it with our firewall, and that really just, and our salespeople knew how to sell devices. So like we thought about a lot of different factors, like the tech we would get. You also have to think about go-to-market. So if you're an acquirer, like you're not going to buy something, or hopefully you're smart enough not to buy something if you don't feel it's going to be a good fit with your go-to-market model. Like, your salespeople have to be able to sell it. Otherwise, you're going to buy it and it's just going to go nowhere. And so if you think about it, you have to think about those considerations from a seller perspective. Like, how does my company that I'm investing in, how is it going to create value for some other company in a way that they're not going to be able to either build it on their own, go to market with it or go to market with it effectively. And so those are some of the factors that we look at, but it's so important that companies have to be bought and not sold. And so you got to find things that you think are going to break real ground. I will tell you, if you're in a core market and you're doing something disruptive, that's a good place to be. And then I will tell you the bad news in all of this right now is it's hard to acquire companies. I'm sitting here in the DC area, and look, it's just not easy right now. The climate, the regulatory climate for public companies to do acquisitions is harder than it's ever been in my nearly 30-year career. And so whatever you do now, you got to expect it's going to be a journey. It's going to be a long game that you're going to have to play. Like, we just aren't seeing exits. There's been, 2 tech IPOs, I think this year. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, the IPO market is way down, so the exit opportunities there are way down. Acquisitions are way down. And so, like, it's an interesting cycle right now to think about. I shouldn't say you, like, we have a venture fund as well that's in my team. And so I just tell my team, like, look, whatever we do, this is going to be a long game. Like, it's not going to be like it was where if you would have invested in some things in 2018 or 2019, a lot of great exit opportunities in 2021. We're just not in that cycle right now. And so it's going to be a long road.
Is that the time to build?
You know, look, it's always a good time to be a great entrepreneur, right? Like, if you're talented, it's always a good time to do something. And if you're a great investor, it's always like there's always opportunities for investors. Like, I think, look, the best investors find opportunities in the worst markets, and they find ways to, to help. They find ways to get companies in their portfolio. They find ways to help their portfolio companies be successful. Sometimes, like a lot of what's happening now, some of the best VCs in Silicon Valley are incubating ideas right now because they see that as a path to success. So they're saying, look, we see a need here. We're going to go find some capable people. We're going to put some capital with them, and we're going to go after this particular idea or this particular opportunity. And so, I mean, look at some of the blockbuster IPOs we've seen over the last couple of years, like Snowflake is the quintessential example of this, right? Snowflake was incubated in Sutter Hill Ventures in Silicon Valley, and that's obviously been a wildly successful company. But like, I see a lot of that in AI right now, which is, like in my world right now, it's all AI all the time. But that's something to consider. I got together with Hamet the other day, who used to be Hamet Watt. Many of you guys might know him. He used to be in this area. He's in LA now, but he's doing that, right? He's incubating companies in addition to making investments, because he sees that as an interesting way for him to go after places in the market where there's opportunity that's not being met.
How does, you've served on a number of public boards and private boards, so Rapid7, Snap, and American Express. How does your board perspective, how does your advice change based on your board experience?
It doesn't really change. Like, if I think back, like Rapid7 was one as a great example. For those of you who don't know, Rapid7 is a cybersecurity company. They started out as like a vulnerability management play. I ended up joining the board of that company back in 2010. I mean, they were private. They were tiny, and I went through the full cycle with those guys, right? From early days. CEO transition. I know somebody asked earlier about needing somebody white in the room, but we actually replaced a white CEO with a black CEO, Corey Thomas, who's still leading the company. The guy ended up taking it public. The thing is, it's like when I joined it, I don't know that it was worth $100 million in economic value. It's like $2.5 billion today. Like, insane trajectory for that thing. And it's just a great example of, it was a good company. They executed well. They built technology. They had a great go-to-market, and they just stuck at it. Like, they just worked at it. And it's been years. And I joined the board of that company in 2010. It's 13 years later. Like, it's been a long road for those guys, but they've done great work. And it's just a good example of, right position in the market, hard work, just getting it, like grinding it out at times when they need to. There were times when things really moved fast, and they took advantage of that as well. But it can be done. It can be done. Other ones, like I was on the board of Snap. Snap was like, that thing is up, it's down. There's a lot, but it's an amazing idea. Like, Evan is probably one of he's probably one of the most gifted product minds I've ever met in my career. Like, the guy, there's a joke about that, like, Evan is the best product manager that Facebook ever had, right? Like, because they always go copy everything that he does at Snap. But he's just a brilliant product mind, and Snap has had its ups and downs, but it's still a $5 billion company in top line revenue today, and it's an incredible platform. And they continue to grow their active users and that sort of thing. And I think once they work through their ad model, I think that company's got a lot of upside.
All right, and now let's shift to the future. So at Microsoft, tell us a little bit about the whole scope of your job at Microsoft.
Yeah, so today I'm doing something completely different than I've ever done. I lead our business development, our strategy, and our ventures teams at Microsoft. So M12, some of you may know M12, that's one of my teams. And we're Series A, Series B, some seed investing that we do through M12. It's a corporate VC, so we have a little bit of a different focus. My focus for the team is, I want you to participate in the venture market, but I want signal that I can't get anywhere else in Microsoft. We're a big place, and I want to know what's going on in the market through participating in the market, and that's one of the core focus areas for us in M12. We also do all the most complex deals. So OpenAI, which you might have heard of, is one of the deals that our team works on, and then there's tons of other ones we're doing, ecosystem partnerships. We have invested in some of the other AI players like Inflection and Adept. You may have heard of some of those companies as well. So we kind of run the gamut. My teams really are the ones that think about the future, and it's been an amazing ride. Like, I came to Microsoft partially because I knew some of the key folks, and I was just interested in what I might see at a different level, doing what I'm doing at Microsoft. And I had no idea when I joined a little bit over 2 years ago that we'd be in the middle of this AI. Like, AI is not only transforming tech. I mean, if you guys aren't already there yet, I'm speaking to a bunch of VCs, so hopefully you guys agree with me. It's not only changing tech, it's going to change humanity, right? Like, it's going to change everything for us. How we interact with each other, how we interact with technology, the whole notion of software and how, user software, all that's going to be very different in 5 years, 10 years time. Self-driving vehicles. I mean, I don't know if you guys have it in DC yet, but there's a bunch of Waymo and Cruise cars riding around San Francisco right now with no drivers in them. We're invested in this company called Wave out of the UK. I rode in one of their cars over the spring. It was, we were going through the streets of London. Now, if you ever spend time in London, it ain't like riding around San Francisco, right? It's super tight, a lot of buses, a lot of people. But that's like we're, in many ways, we're living in the future. And it's exciting for me. It's been an amazing ride. It's a fun ride. It's a good time to be investing right now. And I will tell you, if you're not doing it out here, the West Coast VCs are super aggressive right now. Any whiff of AI, and they're all over it. And because they see the opportunity to get in front of the curve on some of these on some of these founders and some of the tooling and some of the application level stuff that's being done, they see it and they're going after it hard.
To go a little deeper on the AI front, so you've got not just a front row seat, you're literally on the sidelines. So you see a lot of use cases. Talk about some of the top use cases you've seen. Talk about some of the kind of really cool brainstorming sessions you've probably set in, stuff that we can all go home and be like, oh, I heard about this really cool thing.
The use cases for AI are literally infinite right now. I mean, it's I remember a year and a half ago, everybody's thinking about Web3, talking about Web3. In fact, I had somebody emailing me today about Bitcoin or whatever, and I'm like, dude, why are you living in 2021? It's 2023. We need to, but it's unlike Web3, which was a little bit of a problems, technology looking for problems to solve. This is pretty obvious to everyone, the problems that we can solve. Whether it's how customer engagement works at a given company, customer support, that's just a massive. I mean, think about that is a multi. It's probably probably $100 to $200 billion industry, just customer support, right? And if you think about the labor costs, the whole nine, if you talk to most people who run a call center, their average tenure for most people is less than a year. So the cost of hiring people and training people is ridiculous. And so AI can literally help solve that problem in the fullness of time, right? Tools have to get built, it has to be battle tested, there'll be things like that that have to go on. But in the fullness of time, AI can really put a real dent in this problem of not only filling in the gaps, but like it can help you train up people a lot quicker. It can help you take somebody who may not be that great at their job and make them great at their job. So there's so many ways in which I think AI is going to be really, really powerful. Customer support being one. Almost any task today that is like automated, like that's rote could be automated. So finance, accounting, like so many elements of what we do today in organizations, I think is opportunity for AI to either be a co-pilot, which is what we call a lot of our tools, where it's helping people get their jobs done, it's helping people be smarter, faster, better. I've talked about cybersecurity a bunch so far. Cybersecurity co-pilots. Like we like to say in cyber, we like to navel gaze about being a 3 million worker shortage in the U.S. alone. Hey, we have an opportunity to make a dent in that problem through using AI, right? You can actually make your current workforce a lot more productive, a lot better, and hopefully we obviate the need for 3 million people that we just don't literally have today. So I'm super bullish on all of the opportunities we have to do things better, to do things faster, to basically mitigate some of the places in the labor market where we don't have enough people today. Self-driving vehicles are another example of that. Turnover in drivers for, if you're like Uber or Lyft, tons of turnover in your driver workforce. People who drive long haul trucking, like it's dangerous, it's hard work, you can't get enough people to do the job. Like long haul trucking is an opportunity for autonomous vehicles that I think is a huge opportunity. And we're talking about, like if you think about the transportation economy, like it's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity on the same size and scale as all of IT that we know of today. And so like these market opportunities are massive, and there's so many places. And I think what's most important, I think, I always tell our teams is we have to have a thesis. Like, what do we believe in? Like, what do we want? What do we think is going to win in some of these core categories? Now, those are the end markets. I mean, right now in AI, the gold rush right now is around the picks and shovels, kind of like what I would tell you. Like so many companies in Silicon Valley. I just came from an event a couple of days ago where just tons of companies that are building, whether they're building standalone vector databases or building vectors into existing database architectures, training infrastructure, data pipelining, like all of the stuff that you need to work to make sure your data is clean, it's in the right place, tuning the models, have the models be able to link to applications in a way that you can actually utilize them. There's so many places where I just think there's massive opportunity to enable others who are then going to go build a lot of the end user applications that AI will ultimately help transform. And so that's where there's a lot of heat right now in the marketplace. A lot of people are building their own models. That's another thing. I've seen a pretty big uptick in that as of late as well.
Oh yeah, because they don't want to give their data away to OpenAI. I'm going to go off script. So, thinking about all your experiences, if tomorrow you opened up a venture capital shop, what would be like your top 5 things to look at? Like, what would you do as a VC?
Well, for me, if I was going to do it, I would invest in cybersecurity. Sort of a no-brainer for me. Cybersecurity, I do think AI infra is a category you just right now it's a good place to be. I also think that I probably would want to have some bets in companies that are building their own specialized models. I would love to invest in healthcare because I do think I'm one of those people who believes that radiology and pathology, like anything that has to do with like cancer discovery, the opportunity there is massive. Like I hope in a relatively short period of time, like I won't be able to go to the doctor without actually the doctor having some form of AI co-pilot that's helping, right? And like why rely on a human to make decisions without like a really intelligent agent that's kind of giving that human a whole nother set of considerations to think about, by the way, with the benefit of like literally having studied every other use case you could possibly think of. Like it's like the opportunities are vast. And like we invested in this company called Page AI, which is helping pathologists identify lung cancer, basically. And the AI is much better than the human eye at spotting some of the anomalies that you would see in tissue samples. So therefore, you're much faster, much more accurate at identifying cancers like lung cancer. And like you start to think about the time frame, one thing that's certainly true is that if you can catch cancer earlier, it's far more treatable, survival rates go up, the quality of life post-treatment is far better if you can go after this stuff early. If you're getting treated for cancer late, you got tons of chemo, it's hard you can get really sick. And if you can catch it early, it's just a much lighter weight process. And I just think these AI tools have an opportunity to transform. Now, the problem with that one is like, I don't know anything about healthcare. So like, other than like, as a human and just like a guy who like thinks about these opportunities, I'm interested in it, but I probably wouldn't invest there because I'm not smart enough about that space.
Speaking of what you know and don't know, what was the biggest thing that you didn't know at Microsoft before you joined that you now know?
Well, I know a ton more about generative AI than I ever thought. I mean, generative AI wasn't a term when I joined Microsoft 2.5 years ago. I mean, there was a lot of AI, right? We all use, like in cyber, there's tons of machine learning. Many people are on Instagram or use search engines. That's all machine. There's tons of models that are utilized. They've been mainstream for a long time. The difference we have now is generative AI, these foundational models that are just trained on massive data sets and are a lot more about trying to emulate the way humans would think about a problem or answer a question, and a lot less about just predicting like, okay, should I, you looked at these things on the shopping cart, so I'm going to actually throw this other one at you, or you've watched these movies or these television shows, so I'm going to recommend that you look at something. Like machine learning is great for those things, but what these foundational models do now is really they're helping people reason, and now they don't reason, but they help people function at like an expert level, but more akin to the way a human would function. I think it's just very different than what we've been used to.
That's, you want me to do some audience questions?
Sure.
Yeah. All right, so we've got this guy from Microsoft who, nice perch. What questions would you have of him as you think about investing, starting your company? What you guys got?
Thank you so much for joining us. Haywood Perry, help lead Mark Cuban's family office. And I'm fascinated right now with, I don't know, just kind of like, I'm curious from your vantage point, like what have been some of the regrets, like some of the deals that perhaps you did not go into that you wish you would have, some of the deals that you did go into, you don't necessarily have to name names. But I'm just curious, like kind of like your considerations when you think through that lens.
It's interesting you say that. I was talking to one of the founders of Coatue. You guys all know Coatue, the hedge fund. I was talking to one of the founders of Coatue the other day, and I've not done a lot of investing in my career. I've bought a lot of companies. Yes, I've invested in some things, but I'm far from consider myself like much of an investor. But he said something to me about, he kind of went down the same path you just went with your question. He said, look, for us, we can't afford to miss that home run. Like we can't afford to miss Netflix, and they didn't. They rode Netflix like the whole way. Like those are the ones we have to really win. NVIDIA, Netflix, like those companies. And Microsoft's 50 years old, so like maybe that would be one that they probably wouldn't have gotten into. But you get my point. Like, when I think about kind of things that have happened in my lifetime, and I look back, in cyber is probably the place where I've spent a lot of my time. One for me is Palo Alto Networks. I probably could have been in that deal pre-IPO. It's like $50 billion now. So that's one I would have liked to have invested in. CrowdStrike, I just couldn't do it because those guys left McAfee and competed with us. So I couldn't get my mind around that one. But like I would say, like in cyber, like those are the two that like in the last 10 years, like if you're a cyber investor and you take the position that like I can't miss the home runs, like those were the home runs. Like when you think about what's going on, maybe Fortinet is in that category a little bit, but I would say Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, and probably to a lesser extent Fortinet were the ones that if you were going to hit home runs in cyber, those are the ones.
Stand up.
You're going to regret inviting me, Maurice. So great to have you, Chris. As someone who's so into generative AI, what do you think are sort of the vulnerabilities in AI that really scare you, or think that need to be sort of corrected?
I mean, I think, look, there is a full spectrum of risk with AI. In fact, I just came out of an advisory meeting where we talked about AI was one of the topics. And so here's the way I think about it. Right now, there are very traditional cybersecurity risks with AI. Like you can download a bunch of open source models from Hugging Face, and third parties are embedding malware in those models. And a traditional malware scanner doesn't pick it up because of the way that it's instrumented into the model. So that's a very traditional problem. I think that's one that'll reasonably get solved. Then there's how do you protect model integrity? How do you make sure that a model can't be attacked? Like you can't use prompts as a way to attack a model, to learn the model, and then therefore manipulate the model in strange and weird ways. Like I put that in the category of like, basic cybersecurity model safety, hygiene. And then there's a whole spectrum of things you have to pay attention to, all the way through big picture issues that would fall under the responsible AI category, right? Like AI is going to be used by adversaries. It's going to be used for deepfakes. It's going to be used for misinformation, disinformation campaigns. There are tons of people who are really, really worried about how AI will be used by very bad people to supercharge how they'll try to manipulate elections in a couple years. Like those are massive societal issues. We have to think about bias and how people will be manipulated in their daily lives using AI techniques. And so there's kind of this full spectrum from real cybersecurity risks and issues to kind of these macro level problems that we'll all face with AI, which is if it gets used in the wrong way by the wrong people, that could be, that could have like significant consequences for us. And then I think there's going to be issues in between those two things, like where, there'll be I think there's going to be a big proliferation, for example, of open source models, and that'll be utilized for different, some of them will be at risk because there's no governance, over them, or maybe they weren't built with secure development lifecycle practices, like all that kind of stuff. So the risks are many, but the counterfactual is that there's real offensive opportunity as well for the good people, right? Which is cybersecurity co-pilots to help the security operations analysts, writing software in a secure way. Like, where there's so much focus right now on secure development practices and visibility into the software development lifecycle. If you're using AI to help write your software stack, why wouldn't you use it to help you make sure that you're writing it, you minimize your vulnerabilities, you're checking, all the stuff that companies like Sneak and there's a bazillion of other players in the market are doing. You can use AI to obviate a lot of those same issues, and I think that's an opportunity for us, amongst all the many other things we've talked about.
Do you think we'll be able to keep up? Humans will be able to keep up with AI at the rate it's changing?
I think we're going to have to learn to some extent as we go along. Like I'm one of those people who refuses to try to predict exactly how this is going to play. I do think that, I do think we're going to, this has been said before, but I do think we're going to overestimate what we can do in a year, and we're going to underestimate what can happen in 10 years. And so I think that we have to iterate and learn. What I feel good about is, like, there's a lot of the other big players, OpenAI, Google, have put a lot of effort and energy into thinking through the use cases and making sure that, not only do we have principles, but we have tools and we have technology that we use. We have methodologies like reinforcement learning with human feedback to make sure that we're building out the right integrity levels in the model. Like, we have tools to go after bias in these models. We have ways to track how the models are responding to different usage patterns. And so I feel good that we've tried to be very serious and purposeful about how we are bringing AI to the world. What's hard, though, is, like, none of us can really predict where this is all going to go, because, Phil and I were talking about this earlier. Like, I've been in this game for a long time now, like almost 30 years, and like the adoption curves on this stuff are like, they're completely vertical. Like, you don't have a guy he'll write an application like tonight, and like in 2 weeks it could have like 10,000 GitHub stars. Like, it can be, like, the adoption rates on this stuff are just off the charts. By the way, for anybody who's not like looking at GitHub stars, you're missing a big opportunity to really see like where the open source projects are that are getting traction. So I'll put that out there. That's one thing to add to your repertoire in terms of how you think about evaluating companies. But the cycles are so fast, it's really hard to predict where things are going to go. And I do think that there is now a wave of open source models that are coming, and so like that's going to bring a whole nother set of considerations we're going to have to think about, and that won't be like 4 or 5 companies that kind of have control over what's going on with those models. It's going to be open, and that's good and bad in some ways.
Next up, Margaret.
Good afternoon. First of all, thanks for being here. My name is Jonathan Mayo, and I'm a founder of a company called Team Excel, and we're in the ed tech space, so kind of like fantasy sports for education. And I've been a huge proponent. We're a benefit corporation, and so we work, looking for investment in terms of social impact funds. And just curious, from where you sit, where you see social impact investing, if that's something that falls within your space. I know obviously the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, if you all do any kind of cross-pollination work, just thinking about some of our large social issues and how we use impact investing to make an impact in the social space.
Yeah, it's a great question. We do really do like a few things in this space. We have a foundation, obviously, which isn't investing, right? It's traditional. It's like you're making grants and things like that, and so Microsoft does a lot of that. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, like, we don't really do a ton like in collaboration with them, but obviously, Bill's still, he's still around every now and then, different events and stuff like that. So we share information. Like, they're pretty deep in AI right now, so there's a lot of cross-pollination of thinking around AI. We do have something called the Climate Innovation Fund. So sustainability, climate change is a category where we are doing investing, but with a social outcome, obviously, which is to improve the environment, obviously slow down negative climate change. And we've made commitments as a company to be carbon neutral or negative by 2030. And so that includes all the data centers and all that we'll do in terms of training these large models and the like. But we have invested in, I want to say somewhere, and this isn't in my group, but I spend time with these guys, probably somewhere between 30 and 40 companies in our portfolio. And that's either around like renewables or ways in which you can optimize supply chains to reduce carbon emissions. Like one of the companies we did invest in jointly between M12, which is our venture fund, and our climate investment fund is like a company called Nautilus Labs, which basically optimizes for ocean shipping routes. And like if you think about it, you just optimize a route, and you do that for like all the shipping, all the large ships that are on the oceans every day. Like you can literally take 10% out of the energy emissions of like a massive industry, right? If you think about all the stuff that gets shipped around the world, like that's real impact. So those are the places where we participate. We're probably doing things in education and other places through our foundation, but we don't do as much investing in that category.
Margaret had a question.
Hi, Margaret Falzon. I run operations at Squadra Ventures. We do pre-seed to Series A cyber and national security. The question I wanted to ask you, Secretary Anderson gave us sort of the stat earlier that the DMV is the second largest metro economy in the country, but no matter what, when you're sitting outside of Silicon Valley, our eyes go there, our ears go there, we're out here listening to what the experience and what the trends are there. And so given that you've been, and sort of this idea that sometimes you all are living in the future, and maybe we're a couple weeks or months behind. So given that you've been in both spaces, what do you think that this DMV-based VC community needs to understand? Sort of what are we undervaluing, what are we overvaluing?
I will say this. First of all, it's a great question. I'm probably not in a place to place sort of a value judgment on what you're not doing, I guess, in the DMV area. What I would say is, look, ground zero for AI right now is San Francisco. And there's a hackathon literally every other day. And there's a lot. I would just find an opportunity to get out there at least once, sometime in the next 3, 4, or 5 months, go to one of the events, just get a feel for like what people are doing, and then bring it back. Because I guarantee you that's not happening here. I mean, like people are like it's crazy right now. Like entrepreneurs are coming back to the city. Like there'll be like 5 or 6 people renting houses like together so they can collaborate like in a informal YC model. Like YC's 30, all their whole entire class are AI startups right now. It's just like the action is off the charts. And so one thing you can do, I would say, is come out, right? Like jump, like there's tons of these things going on right now, and come out and just spend a little time, meet some of the entrepreneurs, see what's going on. It's probably worth it. It's worth the trip.
Last question.
So, Chris, you report directly to Satya, and a lot of folks would say he's probably one of the best or the best CEOs of the last decade or two. What have you learned from him, working for him directly?
Yeah, so I mean, I will tell you, he's the reason I came to Microsoft. I wouldn't be at Microsoft if there was no Satya. At least I don't think so. He's a real deal, you guys. I mean, he is a brilliant. Obviously, he grew up in Microsoft. He's got I always like to say, like, he's got the energy. I used to work for John Chambers at Cisco. The energy of John Chambers, who was like just always on guy, but with like an amazing technical acumen. And so much of what's going on right now, like I was, this whole week, people have been coming up to me saying, I just can't believe how fast you guys have moved to go after this AI thing. Like how does a company like 50-year-old company, huge company like Microsoft pivot and just go after this thing the way you did? And like, I will say, like, so much of that comes down to Satya. And like, that was a classic example of like leadership. The CEO said, we're gonna go take this hill. We're gonna do it this way. All the other stuff we've been doing, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna go do this. And like, we did it. And he was willing to take risk. Like, in 2019, the company invested in OpenAI. We doubled down on that partnership earlier this year. And they're obviously our most important partner when it comes to AI. Obviously, we're doing a lot more. We have a big cloud platform, so we have other players that we work with, but they're our core partner. And so much of the reason the company has moved and executed the way we have is like Satya's focus on this and like pivoting the company. Now I will say like the environment helped a little bit as well because we, like late last summer, like the market was starting to turn and so it was a good time actually to kind of refocus the company on the next leg of the journey. But he's been like he really gets a lot of credit for having the vision, not only having the vision, but like having the conviction and really taking a calculated risk and not being afraid to go out and play offense. And it's worked out. And at the end of the day, CEOs are judged on whether or not they deliver results. And I think things are looking pretty good right now.
All right, round of applause for our man. We got lucky he was in town doing some stuff, so we were able to cajole him to come out and spend some time with us. All right, so hopefully you guys aren't ready to stop. But before we move on, I do want to thank our sponsors, particularly Toulouse and Pac West and Connor and Pac West for like really stepping up, but also Brown Rudnick. I saw at the Shreese. I saw Roger somewhere. I think Cooley. I think the Cooley guys have left. I just want to thank everybody for stepping up and helping us do this. Like without the dollars, this wouldn't have been possible. And as we know, capital is a big part of the equation for all things.
Maurice has been driving us forward. This is our first one, and it's definitely not our last. And so for that, we ask all of you to share your feedback. We know it was content rich, so it wasn't a lot of breaks in between. Obviously, that's probably that would be my first piece of feedback, but it was content rich, and that's incredibly important. Also, just selfishly, just given that we're doing this in the DMV, for those of you who travel, thrilled to introduce you to our growing ecosystem. Who you've met today is probably, I would say, 1/3 of those who unfortunately couldn't show up. This ecosystem is growing. It is differentiated. We also have quality founders that are building businesses in this ecosystem. Folks are moving back to the ecosystem in terms of those who were born here. So a lot to be proud about. In terms of growing the Black VC DMV chapter here. But again, I can't thank all of you also for just showing up. I know this is a long day, but you showed up, you were present, you probed questions, you took some meetings, some new relationships outside. And so for that, I'm bullish what takes place next year. And so again, we appreciate you guys for coming out and also appreciate your feedback. And Mickey, thank you as well.